The late 1970s, a time of disco, rising gas prices, and a palpable fear that gripped Atlanta, Georgia. The city was a bustling hub of activity, with its streets filled with the sounds of music and the hum of daily life. Yet beneath this vibrant surface, a sinister undercurrent began to emerge. The city, usually vibrant and alive, found itself shrouded in a dark cloud as a series of murders began to unfold, each more chilling than the last. The transformation was stark. The once lively streets became places of fear and suspicion. As day turned to night, the sense of dread grew more palpable. Children, most of them young black boys, started to disappear from their neighborhoods, their laughter silenced, their futures stolen. These were children with dreams and aspirations, whose lives were cut short by an unknown menace. The community was left in shock, grappling with the sudden loss of its youngest members. The once familiar streets now seemed menacing, each shadow a potential hiding place for an unknown predator. The sense of safety that once enveloped the neighborhoods was replaced by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. Every corner, every alleyway seemed to harbor a lurking danger. Parents held their children closer, fear etched on their faces, their whispers filled with worry and dread. The community's sense of unity was tested as parents became more protective, their trust in the safety of their surroundings shattered. Conversations were dominated by the latest news, each new disappearance adding to the collective anxiety. The city that had prided itself on its warmth and hospitality now grappled with an insidious evil lurking in its midst. The vibrant social life that once defined Atlanta was overshadowed by a pervasive sense of fear. Public spaces that were once filled with laughter and joy became eerily quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The police, initially slow to react, faced mounting pressure as the body count rose. The community's frustration grew as they demanded answers and action. Law enforcement found themselves in a race against time, trying to piece together clues and prevent further tragedies. Press conferences became a regular occurrence, with officials struggling to provide reassurance amidst the growing panic. The victims, often found in wooded areas or abandoned buildings, bore the marks of a brutal and calculated killer. Each discovery sent shockwaves through the community, deepening the sense of horror. The locations of these grim findings became etched in the collective memory of the city, symbols of the terror that had taken hold. The city, once a symbol of progress and hope, became synonymous with fear and uncertainty. News reports painted a grim picture, and the once proud landmarks of Atlanta seemed to stand as silent witnesses to the unfolding tragedy. The sense of progress that had defined the city was overshadowed by a relentless wave of fear. The Atlanta child murders, as they came to be known, cast a pall over the city, leaving an indelible scar on its psyche and a community forever changed. Vigils and memorials became a common sight, as the community came together to mourn and remember the lost. The impact of these events would be felt for generations, a dark chapter in the history of a city that had once been a beacon of hope. Between 1979 and 1981, a wave of terror washed over Atlanta. The victims, almost all young black boys, were found strangled or suffocated, their bodies discarded in vacant lots, rivers, and wooded areas. Each new discovery brought fresh waves of grief and fear. The city held its breath, waiting for answers that seemed impossible to find. These weren't just statistics to the people of Atlanta. They were sons, brothers, and friends. The victims, ranging in age from 7 to 28, came from different backgrounds, but they were united in their tragic fate. The disappearances followed a chilling pattern. A child would vanish, often in broad daylight, leaving behind a trail of bewilderment and anguish. The city was on edge, the sense of vulnerability palpable. Parents were afraid to let their children out of sight, playgrounds stood eerily quiet, and a once familiar sense of community was replaced by suspicion and fear. The Atlanta child murders had shattered the city's innocence, leaving behind a community grappling with unimaginable loss and a desperate need for justice. The investigation, sprawling and complex, led authorities down numerous dead ends. For months, the city of Atlanta was gripped by fear and uncertainty as the bodies of young African-American children and teenagers continued to be discovered. The police were under immense pressure to find the perpetrator, but every lead seemed to fizzle out, leaving the community in a state of despair. Then, in May 1981, a pivotal moment occurred. The city was on edge, and the police had intensified their efforts, setting up surveillance at key locations in hopes of catching the elusive killer. The tension was palpable as the clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Police staking out a bridge over the Chattahoochee River heard a splash in the dead of night. This was no ordinary splash, it was the sound of something heavy being thrown into the water. The officers on duty immediately sprang into action, their hearts pounding with the possibility that they might finally have a break in the case. They stopped a man driving away from the scene. Wayne Williams, a 23-year-old black freelance photographer and aspiring music producer. Williams was calm but curious as the police questioned him about his presence near the bridge at such an odd hour. His answers were polite but vague, raising the officers' suspicions. While Williams's demeanor raised suspicions, there was no immediate evidence linking him to the case. The police were cautious, knowing that they needed more than just a hunch to make an arrest. They observed him closely, noting his nervous behavior and the inconsistencies in his story. Despite their suspicions, they had to let him go, but they kept him under close surveillance. Williams, a native Atlantan, came from a middle-class background. He lived in a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, a stark contrast to the chaos and violence that had gripped the city. His parents were well-respected members of the community, and Williams himself was seen as a promising young man with a bright future ahead of him. He was known in his community as an ambitious young man with a passion for music and a knack for self-promotion. Williams had dreams of making it big in the music industry, and he worked tirelessly to promote local talent and organize events. His enthusiasm and drive made him a well-known figure in the local music scene. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary life lay a darker side. Williams had a secret life that few knew about, a life filled with deception and manipulation. He was a master at hiding his true nature, presenting a facade of normalcy while harboring dark and disturbing tendencies. Williams had a history of deception and a troubling fascination with young boys. He often used his charm and charisma to lure them in, promising them opportunities in the music industry. Once he gained their trust, he would exploit them for his own sinister purposes, leaving a trail of broken lives in his wake. He often presented himself as a talent scout, using this ruse to gain the trust of his victims. He would approach young boys with the promise of fame and fortune, convincing them that he could make their dreams come true. This facade allowed him to get close to his victims without raising suspicion, making it easier for him to carry out his predatory behavior. As the investigation into Williams's background deepened, a pattern of predatory behavior began to emerge. Detectives uncovered a series of incidents that painted a chilling picture of a man who was far from the upstanding citizen he appeared to be. The more they dug, the more they realized that Williams had been hiding in plain sight, using his charm and intelligence to mask his true nature. His alibi for the night of the splash in the river proved flimsy, and investigators felt they were closing in on the elusive killer who had terrorized Atlanta for so long. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and the police were determined to bring Williams to justice. The city held its breath as the investigation reached its climax, hoping that the nightmare would soon be over. The initial suspicion surrounding Wayne Williams quickly intensified as investigators delved deeper into his life. What began as a routine check soon spiraled into a full-blown investigation, uncovering layers of complexity that no one had anticipated. His alibi for the night he was stopped on the bridge unraveled under scrutiny, revealing inconsistencies and outright lies. Williams claimed he was on his way to a recording session, but the timeline he provided didn't add up. Investigators found it increasingly difficult to believe his story as they pieced together the events of that fateful night. The more detectives learned about Williams, the more he fit the profile they had constructed of the killer. His background, movements, and even his personality traits seemed to align with the characteristics of the person they were hunting. He was known to frequent the same areas as the victims and had a history of erratic behavior that raised red flags. He was often seen lurking near areas where victims had disappeared, and his car was linked to several of the crime scenes. Witnesses reported seeing a vehicle matching the description of Williams's station wagon in the vicinity of multiple abductions, further tightening the noose around him. The turning point in the investigation came with a seemingly insignificant piece of evidence, a tiny fiber found on the body of one of the victims. This fiber, initially overlooked, would become the linchpin in the case against Williams. This fiber, painstakingly analyzed by forensic experts, matched fibers taken from the carpet in Wayne Williams's home. The match was so precise that it left little room for doubt, providing a direct link between Williams and the crime scene. This discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation, providing a tangible link between Williams and the murders that had eluded them for so long. The fiber evidence was a breakthrough, but it was just the beginning. The fiber evidence was just the tip of the iceberg. As investigators dug deeper, they found more fibers, each one meticulously analyzed and compared. The results were damning, showing a consistent pattern that pointed directly to Williams. As the net tightened around Williams, investigators uncovered a treasure trove of incriminating evidence, including dog hairs, carpet fibers, and other trace materials that tied him to a string of victims. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece, and together they painted a grim picture of a calculated and methodical killer. The case against Wayne Williams was growing stronger by the day, and the city of Atlanta watched with bated breath as the walls closed in on their suspected tormentor. The media frenzy added to the pressure, with every new revelation making headlines and fueling public interest. The community, gripped by fear and anticipation, hoped for justice and an end to the nightmare that had plagued them for so long.